My name is Eliza. I am 26 years old and I work at an accounting firm in Boston. This morning I opened my email to find something that made my heart stop. After 9 years of complete silence, my parents want to reconnect. 9 years since they sent me away because my little sister Sophie had a complex congenital heart condition that required all their attention. 9 years of building a life without them. Now they want to talk. Before I tell you how I responded to that email, leave a comment where you are watching from, hit like and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by those who were supposed to love you the most. I was born in a quiet suburb outside of Chicago to what seemed like the perfect family. My father James was a successful architect who designed beautiful homes throughout the Midwest. My mother Laura taught third grade at the local elementary school. She had a way with children that made even the shyest kids bloom under her attention. I was their first child, their pride and joy, as they often told me. My childhood memories before Sophie came along are filled with warmth and laughter. Every summer, we would pack up our minivan and head to Lake Michigan for our annual camping trip. Dad would teach me how to build the perfect campfire, while Mom prepared our favorite meals on the portable stove. At night, we would lie on blankets looking up at the stars as Dad pointed out constellations and told stories about Greek gods and heroes. During school days, Mom would wake up early to prepare my lunchbox with little notes tucked inside. Simple messages like, "Have a great day, sweetheart," or "You will ace that spelling test," that made me feel loved and supported throughout the day. When I came home, she would sit with me at the kitchen table as I did homework, always patient with my questions. Weekends belonged to Dad. He had a small workshop in our garage where he taught me how to use tools safely. I would watch in awe as his skillful hands transformed pieces of wood into beautiful objects. By the time I was 9, I could build a simple birdhouse all by myself. Dad hung it in our backyard, and we spent hours watching the family of wrens that made it their home. "You have an eye for detail just like me," he would say proudly as I carefully measured and marked the wood before cutting. I excelled at school, bringing home straight A's that went straight to the refrigerator door. In 4th grade, I won the school science fair with my project on plant growth. Mom took off work to help me set up my display, and Dad arrived with flowers when I was announced as the winner. Their faces beamed with pride as I accepted my blue ribbon. I also took piano lessons every Tuesday after school. Mom would sit beside me on the bench during practice sessions, gently encouraging me when I struggled with difficult passages. At my first recital, both my parents sat in the front row. Dad recorded the entire performance while Mom dabbed tears from her eyes when I played Fur-Elise without a single mistake. Our family traditions meant everything to me. Sunday morning pancakes shaped like animals' movie nights with homemade popcorn, and birthday celebrations where I got to choose the entire menu for dinner. I always felt seen, heard, and cherished. Friends would come over for play dates and later tell me how lucky I was to have such cool parents. And I knew it was true. Our house was always the gathering place for neighborhood kids because my parents made everyone feel welcome. When I was 10, Mom and Dad sat me down one evening with excited expressions on their faces. "Eliza, we have wonderful news," Mom said, taking my hand in hers. "You are going to be a big sister." Dad put his arm around my shoulders. "What do you think about that kiddo?" My heart soared with excitement. I had always wanted a sibling, someone to share my world with. I imagined teaching my little brother or sister all the things I knew, protecting them and being their hero. "This is the best news ever," I squealed, throwing my arms around both of them. That night I lay in bed dreaming about all the adventures we would have together. I would be the best big sister in the world. I would share all my toys, read bedtime stories, and hold their hand on the first day of school. Our perfect family was going to get even more perfect. As Mom's belly grew, I would press my ear against it, talking to the baby inside. We found out we were having a little sister, and I helped my parents pick out the name Sophie. I even gave up my larger bedroom so they could turn it into a nursery, helping Mom paint the walls a soft yellow and arranging stuffed animals on shelves. "You are already such an amazing big sister," Mom said, as we folded tiny clothes and placed them in drawers. I had no idea then that Sophie's arrival would change everything, that the loving attention I had always known would suddenly vanish, that the perfect family I thought we were would fracture beyond repair. The day Sophie was born started with excitement but ended in fear and confusion. I stayed with our neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, while Dad drove Mom to the hospital. I packed a small backpack with drawings I had made for my new sister and a stuffed rabbit I wanted to give her. When Dad finally called, his voice sounded strange, strained in a way I had never heard before. "Your sister is here, Eliza," he said, but there was no joy in his words. "But there are some complications. The doctors need to run some tests." I did not understand what that meant, only that I could not visit the hospital that day as planned, or the next day, or the day after that. It was nearly a week before I finally got to meet Sophie. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and something else I could not identify but made my stomach knot. Sophie lay in a clear plastic box surrounded by machines with blinking lights and screens showing jagged lines. She was so tiny with tubes and wires attached to her body. She did not look like the plump, rosy babies I had seen in movies. "Your sister has a congenital heart defect," Mom explained, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Her heart did not form correctly, and she needs surgery to fix it." Dad stood by the window staring outside, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. "But she will be okay, right?" I asked, my voice small in the quiet room. Mom and Dad exchanged a look I did not understand then. "We hope so, sweetheart," Mom said, stroking my hair. "The doctors are doing everything they can." Sophie's condition was complex. She had something called tetralogy of Fallot with pulmonary atresia, which meant her heart had multiple defects. The doctors explained she would need several surgeries throughout her childhood, starting with one in her first week of life. That first surgery lasted 12 hours. I stayed with Mrs. Jenkins again, trying to focus on my homework while wondering if my sister would survive. When Dad finally came to pick me up, he looked like he had aged years in a single day. "Sophie made it through the surgery," he said, his voice hollow. "But she has a long road ahead." The financial strain hit our family immediately. Even with insurance, the medical bills piled up on the kitchen counter. I overheard Dad on the phone late one night, his voice tense as he spoke about payment plans and credit card limits. Mom took an extended leave from teaching, which meant her income stopped coming in. Our home transformed into a makeshift medical facility. One corner of the living room became filled with oxygen tanks, medication bottles, and monitoring equipment. The refrigerator door no longer displayed my achievements, but instead held medication schedules and doctor appointment cards. The change in my parents was sudden and dramatic. Their attention, once so freely given to me, now focused entirely on Sophie. Every conversation revolved around her oxygen levels, her medication dosages, her feeding schedule. When they looked at me, it often seemed they were looking through me, their minds preoccupied with Sophie's latest test results or upcoming appointments. I tried my best to adapt to our new reality. I learned to make my own lunches, check my own homework, and get myself ready for school in the mornings. When I came home, I would quietly do my chores and homework without being asked, hoping that by being self-sufficient I could lessen my parents' burden. "You are such a good girl, Eliza," Mom would sometimes say absently as she measured out Sophie's medication. But the words lacked the warmth and attention they once carried. The rhythm of our family life now revolved entirely around Sophie's medical needs. Regular 3 a.m. trips to the emergency room became common when her oxygen levels dropped dangerously low. On these nights, I would wake to the sound of panicked voices and hurried footsteps. Dad would carry Sophie to the car while Mom gathered her medical information. "Stay with Mrs. Jenkins until we call," they would tell me before rushing out the door, sometimes forgetting to say goodbye. Mrs. Jenkins was kind, but her apartment smelled of cigarettes and cats. She would make me toast with too much butter and let me watch television shows my parents would normally forbid. She tried to distract me from my worry, But nothing could stop me from checking the clock every few minutes waiting for news. On my 11th birthday, Sophie had a particularly bad episode and was rushed to the hospital early that morning. The small party my parents had promised was forgotten. No cake, no presents, no celebration. When they finally remembered 3 days later, Mom cried and Dad promised they would make it up to me. "Next year will be twice as special," he said, ruffling my hair. But I already knew the truth. In our new family dynamic, I was an afterthought, a footnote in the all-consuming story of Sophie's illness. Still, I tried harder to gain their attention and approval. I earned perfect scores on tests and brought home glowing reports from teachers. I took on more responsibilities around the house, learning to do laundry and simple cooking. I even learned how to check Sophie's pulse and oxygen levels, so I could help monitor her while my parents grabbed quick showers or moments of rest. "What a mature young lady you are becoming," my father's colleague remarked when he visited once. Dad nodded absently, his eyes on Sophie's monitor. As months turned into years, I became increasingly invisible in my own home. The girl who once had parents who attended every school event, who celebrated every accomplishment, who knew all my friends' names, was gone. In her place stood a shadow child, moving quietly through the house, careful not to disturb the delicate balance that kept Sophie alive. By the time I turned 13, I had mastered the art of self-sufficiency. I maintained my straight A average without anyone checking my homework. I joined the school orchestra and practiced piano alone, no longer having someone sit beside me on the bench. I learned to braid my own hair by watching YouTube tutorials. I became my own parent in all the ways that mattered day to day. The defining moment of my early teen years came during my first major piano recital with the advanced group. After months of practicing Debussy's Clair de Lune, until my fingers ached, the big day arrived. I had reminded my parents multiple times, even marking it on the calendar in the kitchen with a red star. "We would not miss it for the world," Mom had said distractedly while feeding Sophie. The recital hall filled with proud parents clutching bouquets and cameras. I peeked through the curtain, scanning the audience for my family. My heart sank when I could not find them. Still, I held on to hope as I took my seat at the grand piano. The keys felt cold under my trembling fingers as I played the haunting melody. I poured every emotion into that performance, imagining my parents in the audience finally seeing me again. When the last note faded, the audience erupted in applause. I stood and bowed my eyes, still searching. They never came. When I arrived home, I found Mom asleep on the couch, while Sophie watched cartoons on low volume. "Where were you?" I asked when Dad came through the door an hour later. His face registered confusion, then horror as realization dawned. "Your recital," he whispered. "Eliza Sophie had a doctor's appointment that ran long, and then her medication needed to be adjusted, and we forgot." The casual way he admitted it, as if forgetting the most important performance of my young life, was a simple oversight, like missing a turn while driving, broke something inside me. "You always forget about me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I do not matter in this family anymore." "That is not true," he protested weakly. "We have just been overwhelmed with Sophie's care. You understand that, right? You are our big girl. Sophie needs us more right now." Right now. A temporary state that had become permanent. Ms. Richardson, my piano teacher, became my strongest advocate. After the recital, she had found me crying in the practice room and sat with me until the tears stopped. "Your playing was magnificent," she said. "You have a rare gift, Eliza." She began inviting me to stay after lessons for tea and cookies. We would talk about music books and sometimes about my family situation. She never judged my parents harshly, but validated my feelings of abandonment. "It is okay to feel hurt and angry," she told me. "Those feelings do not make you a bad person or a bad sister." My grandmother Margaret also became my lifeline, though she lived in Boston and could only visit occasionally. Our phone calls became a Sunday tradition. Unlike everyone else, she asked about me first, about my interests and dreams, before inquiring about Sophie. "You are extraordinary, Eliza," she would say. "Never forget that." At home, I developed routines to maintain some sense of normalcy. I prepared meals for myself, often leaving portions for my parents, who sometimes forgot to eat during Sophie's health crises. I did the grocery shopping with the emergency credit card Dad had given me. I maintained a detailed calendar of my activities, school assignments, and Sophie's medication schedule. My independence became a double-edged sword. While my parents appreciated my self-sufficiency, it also made it easier for them to direct their attention exclusively to Sophie. The less I needed, the less they gave. The most frightening incident occurred when I was 14. I developed a high fever and severe abdominal pain one weekend when my parents had taken Sophie to a specialist in Milwaukee. Mrs. Jenkins was visiting her daughter, so I was home alone. As the pain intensified, I realized something was seriously wrong. I called 911 myself and managed to give the dispatcher our address before collapsing on the kitchen floor. I woke up in the hospital to a doctor explaining I had appendicitis and had undergone emergency surgery. "Where are your parents?" the nurse asked, concerned about the absence of adults at my bedside. "With my sister," I replied, simply used to the reality by now. It took 6 hours for my parents to arrive, panic-stricken and apologetic when they finally got my messages. The hospital staff gave them disapproving looks. "We will make this up to you," Mom promised, stroking my hair with tears in her eyes. "You always say that," I whispered before drifting back to sleep. The pattern of broken promises continued. Birthday celebrations were postponed and eventually forgotten. Parent-teacher conferences were missed. My achievements went unacknowledged. Each time there was a reason related to Sophie: a treatment, an emergency, a specialist appointment. In a final attempt to be heard, I wrote my parents a letter when I was 15. 10 pages pouring out years of hurt, loneliness, and abandonment. I left it on their bed and spent the day at the library, giving them time to read it, hoping for understanding. When I returned, the letter sat on the kitchen counter with a hastily scribbled note from Mom. "We need to talk about this when things calm down. Sophie's oxygen levels have been unstable today." That talk never happened. The letter was eventually buried under medical bills and forgotten, just like me. The summer I turned 15, Sophie's condition deteriorated significantly. Her doctors recommended a specialized treatment program at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, known for its cardiac care. I came home from summer music camp to find my parents in the midst of frantic planning. Maps of Houston were spread across the kitchen table. Lists of apartments near the hospital covered the countertop. "Eliza, we need to talk," Dad said when he noticed me standing in the doorway. The three of us sat at the dining table, which had not been used for a family meal in years. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, and Dad kept fidgeting with his wedding ring, a nervous habit I recognized. "Sophie needs specialized care that is only available in Houston," Dad explained. "The treatment program could take a year, maybe longer." I nodded, already calculating how this would affect my routine. Perhaps I would stay with Mrs. Jenkins or another neighbor. "We have been thinking about what would be best for everyone," Mom continued, not quite meeting my eyes. "The apartment we can afford in Houston is tiny, just 1 bedroom. My stomach clenched as I began to understand where this conversation was heading. "Your grandmother Margaret has offered to have you come live with her in Boston," Dad said, his voice unnaturally even. "You would have your own room, attend an excellent school, and she could give you the attention we simply cannot right now." The world seemed to tilt sideways. They were sending me away. Not asking if I wanted to go, not presenting it as an option, but as a decision already made. "You are shipping me off?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "No, sweetheart, not like that." Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "This is for the best. For everyone." "For Sophie, you mean?" I corrected. Dad sighed heavily. "Eliza, you are 15 now. You are mature enough to understand the situation. Sophie's life depends on this treatment. We need to focus completely on her recovery. And I am in the way. The words hung in the air between us. That is not what we are saying, Mom protested weakly. When would I come back? I asked. The glance my parents exchanged told me everything. We cannot know for sure, Dad admitted. The doctors say Sophie's treatment could take a year, maybe 2, depending on how she responds. This is just temporary, Mom added quickly. We will call every day and you can visit during school breaks. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. When do I leave? Next week, Dad said softly. We need to get Sophie to Houston as soon as possible. 7 days. After 15 years in my childhood home, I had 7 days to pack up my life and prepare to be exiled. Those days passed in a blur of numbness and silent rage. I methodically folded clothes into suitcases, packed books into boxes, and sorted through 15 years of memories deciding what to take and what to leave behind. My parents were so busy with Sophie's arrangements that they barely noticed my preparations. The night before my departure, I stood in my nearly empty bedroom looking at the pale rectangles on the wall where posters had hung. I ran my fingers along the windowsill where I had watched seasons change year after year. I opened the closet door to smell the familiar scent one last time. No one drove me to the airport. Dad had taken Sophie for pre-travel medical checks, and Mom was finishing the packing. A taxi was called. We will call as soon as we get settled in Houston, Mom promised, hugging me tightly at the door. This really is for the best, Eliza. I did not cry during the taxi ride, or at the check-in counter where the airline representative looked concerned about a 15-year-old traveling alone. I did not cry during the 4-hour flight to Boston. I held my emotions tightly wrapped, afraid that if I let go even a little, I would shatter completely. Grandmother Margaret waited at the arrival gate, her familiar face a lighthouse in my storm. Tall and elegant even in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes that missed nothing. There is my girl, she said, enfolding me in an embrace that smelled of lavender and home. Only then, in the safety of her arms, did the tears finally come. The first few days in Boston were a blur of grief and adjustment. Grandmother's brownstone in Back Bay was beautiful but unfamiliar. The sounds of the city kept me awake at night. My new bedroom, though lovingly prepared with fresh flowers and new bedding, felt like a hotel room rather than my space. I cried myself to sleep those first nights, muffling the sound with pillows so Grandmother would not hear. During the day, I tried to be grateful and pleasant, not wanting to burden her with my pain. True to their word, my parents called the first week. Brief conversations focused mainly on their apartment hunt in Houston and Sophie's preliminary appointments. They asked perfunctory questions about my flight and new school, but seemed distracted and eager to end the calls. We miss you so much, Mom would say before hanging up, but the words rang hollow against their actions. The calls grew less frequent. Weekly became bi-weekly, then monthly. By the time I started school in September, I was lucky to receive a text message checking in. Each unreturned call, each brief text, felt like another door closing between us. The final blow came on my 16th birthday. I waited all day for a call that never came. No card arrived in the mail, no gift, no acknowledgement whatsoever. When Grandmother found me crying that night, she held me tightly and whispered, "You deserve so much better, my darling girl." It was the moment I truly understood I had been abandoned. Not temporarily, not circumstantially, deliberately. My parents had made a choice, and that choice did not include me. The realization that I had been completely discarded by my parents became the strange foundation upon which I built my new life. There is a certain clarity that comes with hitting rock bottom. When you know no one is coming to save you, you learn to save yourself. Grandmother Margaret was my rock during those first devastating months. Unlike my parents, she made me a priority. She attended every school event, helped with homework, and created new traditions just for us. Sunday brunches at her favorite cafe, evening walks along the Charles River, and movie nights with homemade popcorn slowly began to heal the wounds of rejection. "You are not defined by their choices," she would remind me. "You are defined by your own." Starting at a new high school midway through sophomore year was challenging. Cliques had already formed, and I was the outsider with the strange story no one quite understood. "Your parents are in Texas for your sister's treatment, but you live with your grandmother. Why didn't you go with them?" The questions were innocent but painful. I developed a simplified explanation that avoided the raw truth. "My sister needs specialized medical care, and my grandmother offered to let me finish school here in Boston." Most people accepted this without further inquiry. The turning point came when I joined the school orchestra and met Rachel Goldstein, a cellist with wild curly hair and an even wilder laugh. She sat next to me during lunch one day without asking permission. "You play Chopin like someone who knows what sadness is," she said matter-of-factly. "Want to practice together sometime?" Rachel became my first real friend in Boston. She never pushed for details about my family situation, but created space for me to share when I was ready. Her own family, warm and boisterous with 4 siblings and parents who attended every school event, gradually adopted me into their fold, showing me what healthy family dynamics looked like. With the acute pain of abandonment as my motivator, I threw myself into academics and music. Straight A's became my standard. Piano competitions filled my weekends. If my biological family did not want me, I would build a life so remarkable they would regret their decision. My junior year, I was accepted into a prestigious summer music program at Tanglewood. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday. I stared at it for hours, my finger hovering over my parents' contact in my phone. I had not spoken to them in nearly 2 months at that point. The last call had been brief, with my father explaining that Sophie was undergoing another procedure and they would call back soon. They never did. I decided not to share my news with them. Why seek validation from people who had so clearly shown I was not a priority? Instead, I celebrated with grandmother and Rachel's family, who brought a cake to our house and made me play the piece that had earned me the acceptance. High school graduation came with no word from my parents. I had emailed them the date and details months in advance, but received only a brief reply: "We will try our best to make it." I knew they would not come. The auditorium buzzed with excited families as I accepted my diploma and the award for highest achievement in music. Looking out at the crowd, I saw grandmother Margaret beaming proudly, surrounded by Rachel and her family, all cheering as if I were their own. The empty seats I had reserved for my parents were just that: empty. Over the years, I had sent letters to my parents sharing my achievements, my struggles, my everyday life. The responses when they came were brief and focused mainly on Sophie's progress. From these sporadic communications and through distant relatives' social media, I pieced together that Sophie's condition had stabilized after the intensive treatment in Houston. The family photos that occasionally appeared online showed a healthier Sophie growing into a normal teenager. What cut deepest was seeing images of family outings, holidays, and celebrations that I had not been invited to join even after Sophie's condition improved. The temporary separation had become permanent by unspoken agreement. With grandmother's encouragement and a substantial scholarship, I attended Boston University, majoring in finance with a minor in music. My college years were transformative. I found my voice in the business program, discovering a natural aptitude for numbers and analysis. Weekend performances at local cafes kept my passion for piano alive. My social circle expanded and I began to date occasionally, though I struggled with trust. How could I believe someone would stay when my own parents had left? It took years of therapy, which I finally agreed to during sophomore year, to understand that their abandonment reflected their limitations, not my worth. Tragedy struck during my senior year when grandmother Margaret was diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim. 6 months, perhaps less. I immediately took a reduced course load and moved back to the brownstone to care for her. I notified my parents about her condition, hoping they might visit the woman who had stepped in to raise their discarded daughter. They sent flowers and called once to speak with her, but made excuses about Sophie's ongoing medical needs preventing a visit. Even in this, they failed us both. Those final months with grandmother were precious despite the pain. As her body weakened, her wisdom flowed freely. We had conversations about life, love, forgiveness, and finding peace. She never spoke ill of my parents, but acknowledged the injury they had caused. Forgiveness is not about excusing their behavior, she told me one evening as I adjusted her pillows. It is about freeing yourself from the burden of bitterness. You can forgive without reconciling. Grandmother passed away peacefully 2 weeks after I graduated college. I was holding her hand, telling her about the job offer I had received from a prestigious accounting firm in Boston. Her last words to me were, "Live fully, love deeply, and always remember your worth is inherent, not earned." The funeral was small, but filled with people whose lives she had touched. My parents did not attend, sending another flower arrangement with a card expressing their regrets. Their absence at this final farewell confirmed what I had long suspected: they had not just abandoned me, but had also detached from their own responsibilities as son and daughter-in-law. At 23, I found myself alone in the world, in a technical sense, but not truly alone. Rachel and her family remained steadfast. My college friends rallied around me. My therapy group provided understanding. The brownstone which grandmother had left to me became my sanctuary as I began my professional life. Over the next 3 years, I built a career at the accounting firm, eventually specializing in nonprofit financial management. I purchased a small but charming apartment in Cambridge, filled it with plants and books, and created a home that reflected my values and personality. I dated Jake, a kind and patient colleague who understood my hesitation about commitment and never pushed for more than I could give. I created my own traditions, my own milestones, my own definition of family. Sunday brunches with Rachel became sacred. Monthly dinner parties with friends filled my home with laughter. Holiday celebrations became chosen family affairs rather than obligations. The absence of my biological family still ached occasionally, particularly on birthdays and major life events, but the pain had dulled from a stabbing agony to a background soreness. I had accepted that some wounds never completely heal. They just become part of who you are. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the email arrived. I was at my desk reviewing quarterly reports when my phone notification sounded. The sender's name made my coffee go cold in my hand. Laura Nelson. My mother. Subject line: "We need to talk." For several minutes I stared at the notification, unable to open the message. 9 years had passed since they had sent me away. 9 years of building a life without them. 9 years during which they had made their choice clear repeatedly. With trembling fingers, I finally tapped the screen. "Dear Eliza, your father and I have moved to Boston for his new position with an architectural firm there. Sophie is doing well and starting her junior year of high school. We would very much like to reconnect with you. We know we have made mistakes and hurt you deeply. Please consider meeting with us. We miss you. Love, Mom." The email was like a stone thrown into the still pond of the life I had carefully constructed. Ripples of confusion, anger, hope, and fear spread through me, disrupting my hard-won peace. Why now? Why after 9 years? Was Sophie completely healthy now, freeing up their attention for the daughter they had discarded? Or did they simply find it convenient to reconnect now that we were in the same city? I closed my laptop and told my supervisor I needed the rest of the day off. The walk home through Boston's busy streets did nothing to clear my head. Every step brought a new question, a new emotion. Jake came over that evening bringing takeout and a patient ear. I showed him the email, watching his expression change as he read it. "What are you thinking?" he asked carefully, knowing my complicated history. "I do not know what to feel," I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore it completely. Another part wants to meet them just to show them the successful, independent woman I have become without their help. And a tiny, foolish part still wants their approval, their love. Jake, who had lost his own father to cancer and understood the complexity of family relationships, took my hand. Whatever you decide, I am with you. But do it for yourself, not for them. Rachel's advice was more direct. They do not deserve your time, she said over coffee the next morning. They abandoned you when you needed them most. They missed your entire adolescence. They skipped your graduation. They did not even come to your grandmother's funeral. What possible reason could justify reconnecting now? I spent the next few days researching my parents online, something I had avoided for years to protect my heart. My father's new position was with a prestigious architectural firm in Boston's financial district. Social media showed recent photos of them with Sophie, now a pretty teenager with no visible signs of the illness that had once threatened her life. Most revealing was a post from 6 months ago showing the three of them at Sophie's Sweet 16 celebration. The caption read, "Celebrating our miracle girl's 16th birthday, so grateful for every day with her." The date of the post coincided with my 26th birthday. They had remembered her milestone while forgetting mine entirely. After a week of deliberation and a particularly intense therapy session, I decided to respond. Not for them, but for my own closure. My reply was brief. I received your email. I need time to consider your request. Please understand this is difficult for me after 9 years of separation. My mother called the very next day. Seeing her name on my phone screen sent my heart racing. I answered with my professional voice, the one I used with difficult clients. "Hello, Laura." "Not Mom. Not anymore." "Eliza," she breathed as though my name was unfamiliar on her tongue. "Thank you for taking my call. It is so good to hear your voice." The conversation was strained, filled with awkward pauses and superficial questions. She asked about my job but did not know what I had studied in college. She mentioned my apartment but had no idea I had inherited grandmother's brownstone. She was essentially speaking to a stranger. When I asked why they wanted to reconnect now after all this time, her explanation was as inadequate as I had expected. "Sophie is doing so well now. Her last surgery was 2 years ago, and the doctors believe she will not need more interventions. We always meant to bring you back home, but the years just passed so quickly. When your father got the job offer in Boston, we thought it was a sign that we should try to be a family again." "A family," I repeated flatly. "We have not been a family since I was 15 years old." "We did what we thought was best for Sophie," she said defensively. "Her condition was life-threatening. We had to make impossible choices." "You chose her," I stated simply. "Repeatedly, for years, even after her condition stabilized." She had no answer for that. After several uncomfortable minutes, she suggested dinner that weekend. The three of us and Sophie. "She really wants to meet you properly. She has only fragmented memories from childhood." The thought of sitting across from the sister, who had inadvertently been the catalyst for my abandonment, brought complicated emotions. I had never blamed Sophie for her illness or for needing our parents' care. She had been a child just as I had been. The responsibility lay entirely with the adults who had made their choices. "I will think about it," I told her before ending the call. Jake held me that night as I cried for the first time in years over my family. Not just for what had happened, but for what might have been. For the relationship with Sophie I never got to have. For the parents who might have been proud of my accomplishments had they bothered to witness them. "Whatever you decide," he whispered into my hair, "remember that you are whole and complete exactly as you are. Their presence or absence does not define your worth." After 2 days of reflection, I agreed to the dinner. Not from any hope of reconciliation, but from a desire for resolution. 9 years of questions deserved answers, even if those answers would not change the past. The restaurant they chose was an upscale Italian place near the harbor neutral territory for our first meeting. I arrived deliberately 5 minutes late, unwilling to sit alone waiting for them vulnerable to their scrutiny before I could see them. They were already seated at a corner table, the three of them forming a perfect family tableau. My father, hair now graying at the temples, sat straight-backed in a navy blazer. My mother, thinner than I remembered, wore a floral dress and nervous smile. Beside them sat Sophie, a teenager with my mother's eyes and a hesitant expression. For a moment I stood unnoticed, observing them. The parents who had raised me until I was 15 and then simply stopped. The sister I had once eagerly anticipated but barely knew. Strangers connected to me by blood and shared history, but little else. My father spotted me first. "Eliza," he said, standing awkwardly. He moved as if to embrace me, then seemed to think better of it, extending his hand instead. I shook it firmly, a business greeting. "James," I replied, using his first name deliberately. My mother did not hesitate, pulling me into a hug I did not return. "You look beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I stepped back, turning to Sophie. "Hello," I said simply. "Hi," she replied, her voice soft, uncertain. "It is nice to meet you. Again, I mean." She gave a small, self-conscious laugh. We settled into our seats, the waiter a momentary distraction as he took drink orders. When he left, silence descended heavy with unspoken words. "How is your work going?" my father finally asked. "Your mother mentioned you are in accounting." "I am a financial manager specializing in nonprofit organizations," I corrected. "I have been with my firm for 3 years now." "That is wonderful," my mother said too brightly. "You always were good with numbers." The conversation continued in this vain, superficial exchanges that carefully avoided the 9-year gap in our relationship. They asked about my apartment, but not about grandmother's death. They commented on Boston's weather, but not on how I had weathered life without them. Sophie remained mostly quiet, watching our interaction with observant eyes. When she did speak, I caught glimpses of intelligence and sensitivity. She was clearly uncomfortable, a witness to a reunion she could not fully comprehend. After the entrees arrived, my father cleared his throat. "Eliza, we want you to know how proud we are of the woman you have become. Despite everything." Despite everything. As though my abandonment had been a minor inconvenience rather than the defining trauma of my adolescence. "Despite everything," I repeated slowly. "You mean, despite being sent away at 15 and essentially forgotten, despite missing my high school graduation, college acceptance, and graduation, despite not being there when your own mother died?" My mother flinched. "We never forgot you, Eliza. We just got caught up in Sophie's care. The demands were overwhelming. We thought you were better off with your grandmother. And after Sophie's condition stabilized, what was your excuse then?" My voice remained calm but firm. "She has been stable for years according to your own social media posts." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We made mistakes. Serious ones. By the time we realized how much time had passed, you had built a life without us. We were afraid you would not want us back in your life. So you did nothing," I concluded, "until it became convenient because you moved to Boston." "That is not fair," my mother protested weakly. "Fair, you want to talk about fair." The control I had maintained began to crack. Was it fair to ship me off like excess baggage? Was it fair to miss every significant moment of my adolescence? Was it fair to forget my birthdays while celebrating Sophie's? Was it fair to not show up for your own mother's funeral? Sophie's eyes widened at this. She turned to our parents. "You did not go to great-grandma's funeral." Her voice held genuine shock. "It was complicated, honey," my mother said quickly. "Did Sophie know?" I asked suddenly, looking directly at my sister. "Did you know they sent me away permanently? Or did they tell you it was temporary, that I chose to stay with grandmother?" Sophie's expression told me everything. "They said you wanted to stay in Boston because you loved your school and friends there," she said quietly. "They said you visited during my hospitalizations, but I was too sick to remember." A cold understanding washed over me. They had not only abandoned me, they had erased me from their narrative, creating a fiction that absolved them of guilt. "I never visited," I told Sophie directly. Not once. Because I was never invited. I was not given a choice about leaving. I was sent away so they could focus exclusively on you. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophie looked stricken, tears forming in her eyes. My parents sat frozen, their carefully constructed story crumbling. I am not telling you this to hurt you, I assured Sophie. This was never your fault. You were a child who needed care. The responsibility was theirs, not yours. My father finally found his voice. We thought we were doing what was best under impossible circumstances. Sophie's condition was critical. We had to make choices no parent should face. You chose her? I said, the words I had held back for years finally emerging. That was your right as parents. What was not your right was to discard me completely and then pretend it never happened. Tears streamed down my mother's face now. We never stopped loving you, Eliza. Never. We just got lost in surviving each day. For 9 years, I asked quietly. Love requires action, presence, effort. You provided none of those things. Sophie reached across the table, her hand stopping short of touching mine. I always knew I had a big sister, she said softly. They kept your pictures up, but they never explained why you were not with us. I am so sorry for what happened to you because of me. I looked at my sister, truly seeing her for the first time. Not the infant who had inadvertently changed my life. Not the sick child who had required all our parents' attention. But a young woman carrying a burden of guilt she did not deserve. None of this is your fault, I told her firmly. You did not ask to be born with a heart condition. You did not ask for their undivided attention. You did not tell them to send me away. They made those choices. My father attempted to regain control of the conversation. We are here now, Eliza. We want to make things right. To be a family again. That is just it, I said, looking between them. We cannot go back to being the family we were. That family does not exist anymore. I am not the 15-year-old girl you sent away. I am a 26-year-old woman who built a life without you. What are you saying? My mother asked, her voice breaking. I am saying there is no reset button. You cannot erase 9 years of absence and expect to pick up where we left off. I do not need parents anymore. I parented myself with grandmother's help. The weight of my words settled over the table. My father looked down at his plate while my mother wiped at her tears. Only Sophie continued to meet my gaze, her expression a mix of sadness and understanding beyond her years. Can we at least try, my father finally asked, to build something new? We are not asking to reclaim our old roles, just to be part of your life in whatever way you will allow. I considered his words carefully. The anger that had sustained me for years had transformed during our conversation. It was still present, but no longer all-consuming. In its place was something unexpected clarity. I need time, I said finally. This is not a decision I can make over dinner. Whatever happens, it needs to be on my terms, not yours. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Sophie approached me separately. Would it be okay if I contacted you sometime? Just me? I have always wanted to know my sister. Looking into eyes so similar to my own, I felt a connection that transcended our complicated history. I would like that, I told her. You and I have a lot of catching up to do. In the months that followed that fateful dinner, I embarked on a deliberate, cautious journey toward understanding what forgiveness might look like in my unique circumstances. Not the easy forgiveness that pretends harm never occurred, but the complex, nuanced kind that acknowledges pain while choosing to move forward. Sophie and I began meeting for coffee every other weekend, slowly building the sisterly relationship we had been denied. At 16, she was insightful, creative, and carried a maturity born from her own health struggles. She asked thoughtful questions about my life and listened without judgment to my experiences growing up without our parents. I used to imagine what you were doing, she confessed during one of our meetings. When I was little and did not understand why you were not there, I would make up stories about your adventures. In my mind, you were traveling the world having amazing experiences. The reality was less glamorous, I replied with a sad smile. Just a girl trying to figure out who she was without the people who were supposed to help her discover that. My relationship with my parents evolved more slowly, more painfully. 2 weeks after our restaurant meeting, I agreed to meet them again, this time without Sophie. In a quiet cafe near my office, I laid out my conditions for moving forward. I am willing to try building a relationship with you, I told them directly. But not as your daughter in the traditional sense. That opportunity ended when you chose to stay away even after Sophie's condition improved. I am willing to know you as the adults who raised me for my first 15 years, but I do not need or want parental figures now. Their faces reflected the pain my words caused, but they nodded in acceptance. Any relationship we build will be on my terms, I continued. No pressure for holiday gatherings or family portraits until and unless I am ready. No expectations of automatic forgiveness. No pretending the abandonment did not happen. My father, always the more stoic one, cleared his throat. We understand. We do not deserve your forgiveness, but we are grateful for any chance to know the remarkable woman you have become. Over the following months, I allowed them into my life in carefully measured doses. Coffee meetings, occasional dinners, a concert where I performed with a local chamber group. They attended respectfully, made no demands, asked permission before introducing me to colleagues or friends. During one particularly difficult conversation, my mother finally acknowledged the full extent of their failure. We convinced ourselves we were making a necessary sacrifice for Sophie, she admitted. But the truth is, we took the easier path. Focusing on just one child was simpler than balancing the needs of both. We told ourselves you were strong, independent, capable of thriving without us. We used your strength as an excuse to neglect you, and that was unforgivable. Her honesty, though painful, was the first step toward genuine healing. Jake proposed 6 months after my parents re-entered my life. On a weekend trip to Vermont, under a canopy of autumn leaves, he knelt and offered not just a ring, but a promise of steadfast love. You are the strongest person I know, he said. Not despite your past, but because of how you have moved through it with grace. I want to build a life with you, one where we both choose each other every single day. I said yes without hesitation. The question of my wedding became a test of the new boundaries I had established. When Jake and I set the date, I invited Sophie as an honored guest and bridesmaid. For my parents, the invitation was more complex. I would like you to attend, I told them during a carefully planned dinner, but not in traditional parental roles. No father-daughter dance, no giving away. Those moments belong to relationships that were nurtured and maintained. You will be welcomed guests, but the place of honor beside me belongs to the people who stood by me when you did not. Rachel's parents, who had embraced me as a daughter during my college years, would fill those ceremonial roles. My mother wiped away tears but nodded in understanding. We are grateful to be included at all, she said simply. On my wedding day, surrounded by friends who had become family and family, who were learning to earn that title, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with reclaiming my own narrative. Sophie stood beside me as a bridesmaid, our bond new but genuine. My parents sat in the second row, respectful of the boundaries I had set. Rachel's father walked me down the aisle, and her mother helped adjust my veil before the ceremony. Jake, steady and loving, waited at the altar, his eyes reflecting the journey we had taken together. As we exchanged vows, promising to choose each other every day, I realized I had found what my parents had failed to give me: unconditional love that perseveres through challenges rather than abandoning when things become difficult. The path of healing is rarely straight or simple. Some days the old pain resurfaces when I least expect it. A casual comment, a family photograph, a milestone that reminds me of all they missed. In those moments, I return to the techniques my therapist taught me, acknowledging the pain without letting it consume me, remembering that my worth was never determined by their presence or absence. My relationship with Sophie has blossomed into something beautiful and unexpected. Despite our 9-year separation, we have discovered shared interests, similar mannerisms, and a connection that transcends our complicated history. She visits our home regularly, forming a bond with Jake, and finding in me the sister she had always longed for. With my parents, progress comes in smaller increments. We have established a cautious rhythm of monthly dinners and occasional shared activities. I have learned their stories from the years we were apart, and they have listened to mine. Not with the intimacy of a traditional parent-child relationship, but with the respectful attention of people seeking understanding. Through this journey, I have discovered that forgiveness is not a single decision, but a daily practice. It does not mean erasing the past or pretending the abandonment did not cut deeply. It means acknowledging what happened, holding people accountable, and still choosing to move forward without the weight of bitterness. True family, I have learned, is not always defined by biology. It is created through consistent presence, unwavering support, and love that does not waver when circumstances become challenging. My chosen family, the people who stood by me when my biological family stepped away, hold a place in my heart that can never be replaced. As Jake and I consider starting our own family someday, I carry the lessons of my past not as burdens, but as wisdom. I know what it means to be truly seen and valued, and what happens when that foundation is broken. I understand that love must be demonstrated through actions, not just words. Most importantly, I recognize that while we cannot choose what happens to us, we can choose how we respond and who we become as a result. Forgiveness has not meant restoring my parents to their former place in my life. That space no longer exists. Instead, it has meant creating a new relationship based on who we all are now, with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. It has meant freeing myself from the prison of resentment while still honoring the truth of my experience. For anyone who has felt abandoned by those who should have loved them most, I want you to know this: your worth was never determined by their choices. You are not defined by what was done to you, but by how you have risen and continue to rise. The family you create, whether through biology or choice, can heal the wounds of the past if you allow yourself to be truly seen and loved. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who hurt you? How did you balance forgiveness with self-protection? Leave a comment below, subscribe. If this story resonated with you, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth is not determined by other people's choices. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that healing is not linear, but it is always possible.